Let me ask you something before we even start. What if everything you were ever taught about who first walked this land was missing a chapter? Not a small chapter, not a footnote, a whole people, a whole civilization, hidden in plain sight, buried under a mound in Tennessee, locked in a government archive, and quietly erased from the story you were given in school. You are not going to hear about this on the History Channel. You are not going to read about it in a mainstream textbook. But the evidence is real. It has been tested, it has been dated, it has been read by some of the top language scholars in the world. And the institution that found it, the Smithsonian Institution, the very organization that is supposed to preserve American history, spent over a century making you forget it existed. Today, we are going back to 1889. It is late autumn in Loudoun County, Tennessee. A field team from the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology is excavating a series of ancient burial mounds along the south bank of the Little Tennessee River, a tributary connected to a waterway called Bat Creek. The lead field agent is a man named John W. Emmert. He has done this work before. He knows how to move carefully through ancient burial sites. He has excavated dozens of mounds across the eastern United States. But on this particular afternoon, at mound number 3, something stops him cold. He lifts a skull, one of several sets of skeletal remains buried in a specific pattern, and beneath it, wedged face down in the earth, is a flat stone. A small stone, about 5 inches long, unremarkable on the surface, except that it has markings on it. Emmert brushes away the dirt. He stares at what he is seeing. Carved into the stone, in neat and deliberate strokes, are characters, letters, a script he has never seen before on American soil. Nearby, he also recovers 2 artifacts, a brass bangle, a bracelet made of copper alloy, and a pair of wooden earrings. These are not random trinkets. These are burial goods, placed with intention, placed with care, placed with someone who mattered. Emmert documents everything and sends his report and the stone to Washington, D.C. And this is where the story gets complicated, because what John W. Emmert dug out of that Tennessee mound in 1889 should have rewritten American history. Instead, it was labeled, filed, and eventually buried again, this time in a government archive, for nearly 100 years. The thing he held in his hands that afternoon in Tennessee, by every rule of the official story of America, should not exist. And the question we are going to spend the next several minutes answering is this: why did the institution that found it work so hard to make you forget it? Stay with me, because this gets deeper than you think. When the Smithsonian publishes their official report in 1894, 5 years after Emmert's discovery, they present a conclusion. The markings on the Bat Creek stone, they say, are Cherokee syllabic characters. Cherokee, indigenous writing from the American Southeast. Case closed. And for 76 years, that is the official answer. Nobody challenges it. The stone sits in the Smithsonian's collection. Life goes on. But then comes 1970, and a scholar named Cyrus H. Gordon enters the picture. Now, if you do not know who Cyrus Gordon is, let me be clear. This man is not a fringe theorist, not a conspiracy blogger. He is a professor, formerly at Brandeis University and New York University, specializing in ancient Semitic languages. He reads Ugaritic, he reads Phoenician, he reads Akkadian, he reads ancient Hebrew. These are languages that most people on Earth have never even heard of, let alone studied. And when Cyrus Gordon looks at the Bat Creek stone, he sees something immediately. The characters on that stone are not Cherokee. They are not even close to Cherokee. What Gordon identifies and publishes in a peer-reviewed academic journal in 1971 is that the inscription is written in paleo-hebrew. That is the ancient form of the Hebrew alphabet, the script used in the ancient Levant before the modern square Hebrew script developed. He notes that the inscription reads from right to left, as Hebrew does, and when he applies that reading direction, the direction the original engravers intended, the characters spell out a clear phrase. The transliteration is LYHWD. In ancient Hebrew, that means for Judah, or more precisely, belonging to the Judeans, a designation for a people, a tribal marker, an identity inscription. Inside a burial mound in Tennessee, sealed for centuries, there is a stone carved with ancient Hebrew letters identifying the people buried there as belonging to Judah. Now, some of you watching this right now are already asking, how do we know Gordon got it right? And that is a fair question. That is the right question to ask. So here is the answer. Gordon was not the only scholar to examine the inscription. Over the following decades, other Semitic language experts looked at his analysis. Scholars including J. Houston McCulloch at Ohio State University reached similar conclusions. The characters are consistent with first-century paleo-Hebrew. Gordon did not just say, "This looks like Hebrew." He cross-referenced the specific letter forms against known examples of the script from that era. He was doing the work. And so here is the question that the official answer has never fully resolved. If people who wrote in the ancient Hebrew script were buried in a Tennessee mound, who were they, and when did they get there? An inscription is powerful, but an inscription can be faked, and skeptics know this. So in the years after Gordon's 1971 publication, the debate over the Bat Creek stone centered on one question: how old is it really? And the answer, when it finally came, is the part that even the skeptics struggled to dismiss cleanly. In the late 1980s and into the 1990s, researchers worked to get a radiocarbon date on the organic material found in the same burial context as the stone. Remember those wooden earrings that Emmert documented alongside it? Wood preserves carbon, and carbon can be dated. The results came back. The wood from the Bat Creek burial site dated to a range of approximately 32 CE to 769 CE. Let me put that in plain language. The burial associated with the stone, dated by independent radiocarbon analysis, falls somewhere between the 1st century and the 8th century of the Common Era. That means the mound was sealed, and people were buried there somewhere between roughly the time of the Roman Empire and the early medieval period. That is not the 1800s. That is not a hoax from the 1870s. That is a burial that predates Columbus by roughly 700 to 1400 years. And the stone was inside that burial, under a skull, in a sealed context. Now, I want to be precise here, because precision matters. Radiocarbon dating has a margin of error. The date range is wide. Some skeptics argue that the earrings could theoretically have been placed in the mound at a different time than the stone. These are legitimate methodological questions, and I am not dismissing them. But here is what you cannot ignore. The physical context of discovery, a sealed mound, multiple burial goods, skeletal remains, combined with a radiocarbon date that pushes the occupation of that mound well before any European contact, that combination is significant. That is not nothing. And here is why the date matters for something far bigger than an academic argument. The standard narrative about Hebrew or Israelite peoples in North America is that they arrived through the transatlantic slave trade, that enslaved Africans with roots in Hebraic tradition were brought to this continent beginning in the 1500s and 1600s. That is one chapter of the story, and it is a real chapter. But the Bat Creek stone, if genuine, points to another chapter entirely. A chapter that says people connected to Hebraic identity and writing were on this continent long before the slave ships ever crossed the Atlantic. And that is a profound difference. because it means the presence of Hebraic-connected peoples in America is not only a product of bondage and forced migration, it may be something older, something that predates the very system that tried to erase it. Does that change anything for you? Think about that and let me know in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of question that deserves an open debate. So, where does this leave us? You have a stone, excavated professionally in 1889, inscribed with what multiple Semitic language scholars identify as paleo-hebrew, buried in a mound dated to between 32 and 769 CE, found alongside brass and wooden artifacts consistent with a deliberate burial. By any reasonable standard, that is a discovery worth investigating, worth putting on display, worth ongoing academic research. Instead, something else happened. After Gordon published his findings in 1971, the academic and archaeological establishment largely closed ranks. The most significant counterargument came from two researchers, Robert Mainfort and Mary Quass, who published a paper arguing that the inscription was not ancient at all. Their claim was that the letters were copied from an 1870 illustration in a Masonic reference book, a drawing that appeared in a work called the Royal Arch Mason and showed similar-looking characters labeled as ancient Hebrew. Their argument, in short, was that someone, possibly Emmert himself, saw that Masonic illustration, copied the letters onto a stone, and planted it in the mound as a hoax. Now, I want to be fair here. Mainfort and Quass raised real concerns. The Masonic illustration does show characters with some similarities to the Bat Creek inscription. Hoaxes were not unheard of in 19th century archaeology, and the era of mound builder mythology produced several famous frauds. But here is where things get complicated, because the counterargument against their paper is substantial. First, the direction. The illustration in that Masonic publication was labeled as reading left to right. The Bat Creek inscription reads right to left, as proper Hebrew does. If someone was simply copying a picture, why would they reverse the reading direction? Second, scholars who have done detailed comparative analysis argue that the specific Paleo-Hebrew letter forms on the stone are not a perfect match for the Masonic illustration. There are differences in stroke and form that suggest the carver was working from actual knowledge of the script, not just tracing an image. Third, there are the radiocarbon dates and the sealed burial context, which do not fit the profile of a 19th century plant at all. And here is the question that never gets answered satisfactorily. If the stone is a hoax, who benefited? John Emmert was a government employee with nothing to gain from planting a fake artifact. If anything, a fraud discovery would have ended his career. The Smithsonian, the institution that supposedly found it, is the same institution that spent decades downplaying its significance. You do not plant a hoax to prove a controversial theory and then hand it to the organization that is going to bury it. The stone was quietly moved to storage, off display, out of public sight for decades. And when an institution that is supposed to protect historical knowledge moves an artifact, one that has been studied, dated, and analyzed by credentialed scholars, into a back room without definitive proof of fraud, what should we call that? That is not science. That is a decision, and decisions have motivations. Here is where we need to have the most important conversation of this video, because the title makes a specific claim, and we need to address it directly and honestly. The claim that the Hebrews were black, that the people connected to this inscription, to this burial, to this stone, were not the people that mainstream popular culture typically pictures when it hears the word Hebrew. So let us talk about that carefully, not as a political statement, but as a genuine historical question, grounded in evidence. When we talk about ancient Hebrew or Israelite peoples, the people who wrote and spoke the language that appears on the Bat Creek stone, who were they physically and where did they come from? The ancient Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon, was not isolated. It sat at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean. The peoples of that region were not homogeneous. Ancient populations in the Near East and Northeast Africa mixed, migrated, and intermarried over thousands of years. And there is a body of scholarship, serious, peer-reviewed scholarship, that pushes back against the Eurocentric image of ancient Israelites that became dominant in Western art and culture beginning in the medieval period. Physical anthropology studies of ancient remains from the region, genetic analyses of populations with documented lineages to ancient Israelite communities, historical records from ancient Egyptian, Assyrian, and Roman sources describing the appearance of Judean and Israelite peoples in terms that would not fit a Northern European phenotype. Scholars like Rudolf Windsor, who documented the presence of Israelite populations in West Africa in his research on Hebrew migration patterns. Historical records showing communities in sub-Saharan Africa with ancient Hebraic practices, including the Beta Israel of Ethiopia, whose lineage claims predate the diaspora. Ancient maps from the medieval Arab cartographic tradition that place the territory of Judah in regions overlapping with West African geography. These are not supernatural claims. These are documented historical inquiries that you can look up and verify for yourself. And if this channel has covered any of those prior research threads, the genetic studies, the migration routes, the West African Hebraic communities, the Bat Creek stone connects directly to all of it. Because here is what the stone says when you put it all together. It says, people who identified as belonging to Judah, people who wrote in the ancient script of the Hebrew-speaking world, were in North America, in a burial mound in Tennessee, centuries before Columbus. And if those people came from communities whose roots were in Africa, if those people were dark-skinned, as a growing body of anthropological evidence suggests the ancient inhabitants of the Levant were, if those people crossed the Atlantic through migration routes that archaeology is only beginning to trace, then the Bat Creek stone is not just an archaeological curiosity, it is a marker, a territorial marker, a burial marker, a statement of identity left in the ground for someone to eventually find. These people took the time to carve their identity into stone for Judah. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted their people to know where they were. And for over 100 years, a major American institution made sure that message stayed buried. The stone does not just prove that someone was here, it proves they were someone. And that is exactly what certain forces in the historical establishment have never been comfortable with. We are near the end now, but I do not want to leave you in a place of anger or bitterness, because that is not what this story is about. This story is about something much more powerful. It is about the fact that a small, flat stone, 5 inches long, pulled from a mound in Tennessee, survived. It survived being labeled wrong for 70 years. It survived being classified as Cherokee when it was not. It survived the counter-arguments, the debunking campaigns, and the archive storage. It survived because the truth carved into it was too specific, too precise, too linguistically coherent to be waved away with a single paper. The Bat Creek stone is still here. The inscription is still readable. The radiocarbon dates are still on record. The analysis by Cyrus Gordon and the scholars who came after him is still in academic literature. You can read it, you can verify it, and that matters enormously, because one of the most effective tools of historical erasure is not fire, it is not war, it is the quiet relabeling of things, the slow drift of artifacts from display cases to storage rooms, the academic consensus that forms around a convenient answer rather than a complete one. Here is what I want you to understand. You are not a passive recipient of history. You are an active investigator. Every person watching this video right now has access to information that previous generations simply did not have. You can look up Cyrus Gordon's 1971 paper. You can read J. Houston McCulloch's analysis. You can search the Smithsonian's own records on the Bat Creek excavation. You can audit the historical record yourself from page 1. And I'm going to tell you what I tell everyone who finds this channel. Do not take my word for it. Do not take the Smithsonian's word for it. Do not take anyone's word for anything when it comes to history this important. Go look, go read, go compare, and then come back here and tell me what you found. The comments section of this video is not just a place for reactions, it is a place for investigation. Some of you watching right now have academic backgrounds. Some of you have researched ancient scripts. Some of you have family histories that connect to exactly the communities we talked about today. Your voice in this conversation matters. So here is the question I'm leaving you with. If the Smithsonian, with all its resources and all its authority, could keep this story buried for over a century, what else is sitting in a storage room right now? What other mounds have not been opened? What other inscriptions have been mislabeled? What other burial goods have been quietly reclassified? The Bat Creek stone did not stay buried, and neither will the rest of it. Your ancestors, whoever they were, wherever they came from, left evidence. They carved their names in stone. They buried their identity with their dead. They meant for someone to find it. You found it. Now share it. If this video gave you something to think about, something to research, something to question, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, what do you think is the strongest piece of evidence in this case, or the strongest argument against it? The archive is deep, and we are just getting started.